word human derives from the Latin humando, which is burial. That we're all featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creatures born between urine and feces. That's a little deeper than our skin color, isn't it? It's a little deeper than our genders, a little deeper than our national identities, a little deeper than our sexual orientation. We're talking about our common humanity. And the most difficult question we ever have to wrestle is the question that Martin Luther King Jr. wrestled with all of his life. What does it mean to be human? Who will we be in the short trek from our mother's womb to tomb? And of course, all of us will one day very soon be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms. What will people say about who we were? What witness did we bear? What kinds of virtues and values did we try to enact and embody? And it sits at the very center of what the Greeks call paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A, which is deep education, not cheap schooling. And I know here at Mount Ida College, you all are about deep education. What is deep education? Critical examination of who you are, the interrogation of yourself, the formation of attention, to trying to get you to attend to the things that matter and turn away from superficial things, instant gratification, ephemeral pleasures, and wrestle with life and death and joy and sorrow. Martin Luther King Jr. comes from a tradition of a people who, after being hated for 400 years, teaches the world so much about how to love. My dear brother, Barry Brown was one of those who went down South in 1965, Alabama. Didn't have to do it. To find out what? To find out how are these particular human beings wrestling with institutionalized hatred. It was called American apartheid. It was called Jim Crow. It was American terrorism. And we all need to learn and to listen from the voices of all of those peoples, no matter what colors or civilizations or cultures, of those who taught us how to love. Now, of course, I could just turn on John Coltrane's Love Supreme and sit down, just let you listen to the music. What is it about Coltrane's music that somehow allows him to dig deep in the dark precincts of his own soul and transfigure his pain in such a way that he's talking about a love supreme? He's talking about us striving for some spiritual excellence, some moral excellence, even given all the hatred coming at him. Or I can turn on Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, and every note and silence between the note is shot through with very deep love. Younger generation, students here at Mount Ida, how many of you all know Marvin Gaye's What's Going On? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. You know what I'm talking about, right? I won't sing for you. I'll sing out of tune. You got some young folk now singing out of tune, make $1 million, but that's another lecture. Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Luther Vandross, Donny Hathaway, Carmen McRae, Nat King Cole, turn it over in their grave. They got the notes right. I can't get the notes right. But we're talking about love. Love of truth, veritas. And the condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak. Love of goodness, keeping track of evil. What is evil? Undeserved harm, unwarranted hurt inflicted on others, no matter who they are, no matter what color. Love of beauty. Rilke reminds us beauty has everything to do with wrestling with trauma and terror and somehow responding creatively and compassionately to that trauma and tear in our lives, each of our lives, that generates something that is magnificent, like a Stephen Sondheim musical play. The beauty in that music and those lyrics over against an unbelievable sense of catastrophe. Of course, we know Stephen Sondheim's mother about to die, had an only son named Stephen. The doctor asked her, "Do you have any words for your son?" She said, "Yes, I have one sentence. I have no regrets in life other than the fact that I gave birth to you, Stephen." It's a level of catastrophe and trauma. And you see how he transfigures it. It's a human thing that Martin Luther King Jr. is talking about. A love of truth and goodness and beauty. And for some of us who are religious, it's the love of the holy, the love of God. We know religious folk have no monopoly on truth, goodness, or beauty. We know that, given all the atrocities and barbarities that churches and mosques, synagogues and temples have promoted. But those same churches, those same synagogues, those same temples have also generated unbelievable and exemplary figures who tried to hold on to honesty and integrity and decency. Martin Luther King Jr. is one. Dorothy Day, towering prophetic figure coming out of the Catholic Church, is another. She wrote the most powerful eulogy for Martin Luther King Jr. on April 5th, 1968, the day after he was murdered in Memphis for the Catholic worker. She said, "Martin Luther King Jr. learned how to die daily." And then there is the inimitable Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, the best friend of Martin Luther King Jr. in his last years, when so many people turned against Martin Luther King Jr., fellow Christian clergy, young activists. And Heschel would say, the very future of America depends on the impact and influence of Martin Luther King Jr., not because he is some isolated individual, but because he exemplifies what is required for any democratic experiment to survive and thrive. Dorothy Day, Rabbi Heschel, Mahatma Gandhi, Hindu, model for Martin Luther King Jr.'s non-violent struggle. Anytime we mention the name Martin Luther King Jr., we all ought to be unsettled. The last thing you want to do is domesticate Brother Martin. I want to keep it funky. I come from funk masters, George Clinton, Bootsy Collins, and they remind us we all emerge from the funk of our mama's womb. And it's bloody down there. I might look all quasi-sharp in my three-piece suit, but when I emerged from my mama's womb, it was funky. Which is to say, it was real. And you have to keep it real. It's what the great Samuel Beckett called the mess. And the mess has to do with all of the concrete realities of our fears, insecurities, and anxieties as we make our way to the grave. What I like about Mount Ida College, it began with the funk of American history. Robert Shaw, the leader of the black soldiers who would come together in the Union Army and help break the back of the Confederate Army. That's blood, that's sweat, that's tears. Don't deodorize that. Don't sanitize that. Martin Luther King Jr. the same way. He's not some kind of Santa Claus with a smile on his face and toys in his bag and come back everybody in love with Martin. When Martin Luther King Jr. died, 72% of white brothers and sisters were against him, and 50% of black people were against Martin Luther King Jr. Young people don't believe that everybody loved Martin when he was breathing. Once the worms got his body, he became popular. But like any prophet, like any truth teller, like any justice bearer, he had to cut radically against the grain. Dorothy Day had to cut radically against the day of the Catholic elites. Then, Rabbi Heschel had to cut against the grain for many Jewish elites. He said, I want to be true to Amos. I want to be true to Isaiah. I'm going to bear witness. I'm marching with Martin Luther King Jr. I'm going to hold his hand as we go into the bleakness of Selma. And of course, you see that grand picture of Rabbi Heschel looking like the Hebrew prophet that he was. Young people, as you undergo paideia here at Mount Ida College, be open to being unsettled. Like I tell my students for the last 40 years, wherever I teach, they enter my classroom, I say, you were here to learn how to die. They said, well, I thought I was just taking a philosophy class to get a grade. Trying to graduate well. No, not here. This is paideia. This is deep education. If you want cheap schooling just to go get a skill somewhere and not to have yourself called into question so you can scrutinize yourself, you go some other class. Because to learn how to die is to learn how to live. The great Montaigne says to philosophize is to learn how to die. Philo, Sophia, love of wisdom, desire for wisdom. No one of us possess wisdom. We're in endless quest for wisdom. And you learn how to die when you examine yourself. You have certain assumptions and presuppositions, and you let some of them go. You come in with certain prejudice. You let some of them go. Come in with certain prejudgment, you examine them and let some of them go. And when you let them go, that's a form of death so that you're able to grow and develop and mature. There is no rebirth without death. There's no awakening without education. There's no education without awakening. That's precisely what this institution is in part all about. You can push aside your limitations, your parochialism to say, lo and behold, I can soar like an eagle. And yet all of us will end up, no matter how wise we are, with our own forms of learned ignorance. Because we all have blind spots. We all have limitations. And what Martin Luther King Jr. was able to do was to bring together the Socratic legacy of Athens, examine life with the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem, which is do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with thy God. One of the fascinating questions that sit at the very center of so much Western philosophical tradition. Why is it Socrates never cries and Jesus never laughs? Thomas More is wrestling with this question as he's at the Tower of London about to be executed. Martin Luther King Jr. comes from a people, a black people, very much like the Israelites in the Hebrew scripture, have thick tears of affliction, persecution, hatred, contempt. But the challenge for each and every one of us, like Martin Luther King Jr., is to be as Socratic as Socrates in his self-examination, but as loving as Amos and Isaiah and Jesus in their attempt to live a committed life. Because what is it about tears? If Socrates never cries, what does that mean? It means that he loved wisdom, but he never loved concrete persons. Because anybody who has ever really loved another human being has shed tears. Just like anybody at their mother's funeral is more than likely not the moment of self-mastery. That's not the moment of self-control. That's the moment of self-surrender. That's the moment of self-giving and recognizing the degree to which you are dependent on those who came before, and their love is in fact shaping not just who you are, but their very afterlife will be at work in your life. And hence the tears. That's what's so magnificent about Hebrew scripture. It begins with the tears of a hated people, an oppressed people. And the covenant is what? Spread hesed, spread loving kindness to the orphan and widow, the fatherless, the motherless, the weak, the vulnerable, those who Brother Joe was invoking in his words. That's what it means to be human. That's the highest level of being alive. And from that way of being in the world, you will derive not instant gratification, but enduring joys. And let's just be honest today, so much of American culture is what? It's a joyless quest for insatiable pleasures. Titillated, stimulated, but where is the deeper joy? I tell young folk all the time, I grew up in a generation where we had a genius called Otis Redding who sang, "Try a little tenderness." Too many young folk listen to the song, "Say my name, say my name, say my name." Ooh, that's a qualitative shift right there. Qualitative shift. What do you mean, Brother West? Because if you're on the love train, you love truth and goodness and beauty. And if you're religious like me, you love the holy, you love God. Justice is what love looks like in public. And when you love folk, you hate the fact they're being treated unfairly. When you love folk, you loathe the fact they're being treated unjustly. And if you don't do something, the rocks are gonna shout out, as we see in Jeremiah. That's Martin Luther King Jr. But that's not him all by himself. That's many of you in this room, I know. Because the legacy goes on. But tenderness is what love feels like in private. And Martin Luther King Jr. had a tenderness about him. Not just a love warrior, but he understood that the fruits of a good life, of spiritual and moral excellence, have as much to do with justice as to do with kindness and gentleness and sweetness. And of course, he comes from a soulful people. And what is soul? Soul is the sharing of a soothing sweetness against the backdrop of a bleakness. That's what you hear in the voice of a David Ruffin. Sings lead for the temptations. Sweet, vulnerable, open, sharing his soul in such a way that it connects with yours. There used to be a group called the Soul Stirrers. Anybody heard of Sam Cooke? Oh, we got some, I know you all on top of things here musically. You got to talk about music with Martin. There's no Martin Luther King Jr. without Mahalia Jackson and Tom Dorsey. Martin Luther King Jr. was down and out. There's a story of Martin Luther King Jr. when he was in a paddy wagon for 4.5 hours in the dark with a German Shepherd, all by himself, driving him from Atlanta all the way down to Reed Prison in Tattnall County, Georgia. When he got out of that paddy wagon, Daddy King told me, he said, "Brother West, it looked like Martin had a nervous breakdown. He could hardly walk. And all he could say was, 'This is the cross we must bear for the freedom of our people.' And all he could say was, and he kept singing that song, 'Precious Lord, take my hand.'" And the song written by Thomas Dorsey, who was a blues man but lost his wife and his child at the same time and moved from blues to become the piano player of Pilgrim Baptist Church in Chicago. And he wrote that song, "Precious Lord." You all know that song, don't you? If not, young people, go home and check it out on your internet. That song keeping Martin Luther King going. soulfulness. Part of the challenge these days for precious and priceless young brothers and sisters of all colors is that, are you able to connect with the best of the past that older people are trying at our best to bequeath to you? We live in a moment of spiritual blackout. What is spiritual blackout? It is the relative eclipse and collapse of integrity, honesty, decency, and courage. And more young people are told to be human at the highest level is to be the smartest and richest in the room. And so instead of love of wisdom, there is a quest for smartness. Let the phones be smart, you must be wise. And I'm not defending stupidity here now. But smartness is not enough. Same is true with money. Yes, we all need money. Yes, we all have some kind of need for resources. But to be the smartest and the richest and still lack wisdom and courage and be connected to the plight of the most vulnerable is a form of spiritual emptiness. More and more young people in our time, in which so much of the culture consists of weapons of mass distraction. T.S. Eliot put it well. He said, oh, in a culture that promotes distractions by distractions, what kind of soul craft, what kind of soul shaping, what kind of soul making can take place? And the result is what? Smartness and riches tied to addiction, drug addiction, sexual addiction, addiction to success as opposed to aspiration to greatness. And the last thing that any individual, the last thing any democracy needs is an obsession with those who want to be successful in terms of being the smartest and the richest with no understanding of what it means to love truth. And if you don't love truth, you open the doors to mendacity. And of course, we're living at a time in which lies have become routinized and normalized. And I'm not just talking about Brother Trump in the White House. That's too easy, even though it's a good place to start. He's a sign and a symbol. He doesn't embody all of the mendacity in America. He's an American as cherry pie. He just happens to be in the White House. We can keep track of the mendacity with New York Times, keep track of all the lies. Somebody's very busy. But the point is not to fetishize Brother Trump. He's made in the image of God. He chooses to be mendacious. He chooses to be indifferent. Rabbi Heschel used to say indifference to evil is more evil than evil itself. It generates ways of life. It turns the back on those who are suffering. Poor, working classes, women, the peoples of color, gay brothers and lesbian sisters and bisexuals and trans, the vulnerable ones. William James used to say indifference is the one trait that makes the very angels weep. Indifference. What happens when you create a whole culture tilts toward mendacity, routinized lies, and people are more and more obsessed with success and want to be successful by any means, or obsessed with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. And all you need to do is look in the newspapers. Who got caught? Business page. Who got caught? Me Too movement. Who got caught? Lack of accountability, lack of answerability, lack of responsibility, and yet the whole culture is obsessed more and more with the market-driven celebrities of glitz at the top. But where are the exemplars of moral and spiritual excellence? We have tremendous problem being famous. The fickleness of fame, the emptiness of fame, if it's not shot through with a moral and spiritual excellence of love and justice and kindness and sweetness and gentleness. Now, I'm very encouraged, my dear brother president of the younger generation, because there is a moral and spiritual awakening that's taking place. No doubt about it. Young people are hungry for something more than just titillation and stimulation. They're hungry for something more than just success. They want more greatness. They want spiritual. You can see it in the movements. They're concerned about ecological catastrophe. Concerned with nuclear catastrophe. The concern with economic catastrophe, with the grotesque wealth inequality. What is it now? The top 3 individuals in the United States have wealth equivalent to 50% of the population, 160 million. They say, well, oh, Brother West, those 3 individuals are the smartest and the richest. I know, I'm a Christian, I try to love everybody. But I also know that we've got some structures and some institutions in place that make it very difficult for some of the most talented among working classes and poor peoples to gain access to contexts in which their capacities can be affirmed. That also is what is so crucial about Mount Ida College. First get here, college, first generation, get a chance to undergo paideia, get a chance to gain that self-confidence and self-respect that's required for you to fulfill whatever your potential and capacity is, not in any way by putting others down, but affirming one's own self in light of one's own history and family and community and traditions. But then most importantly, choosing to be decent human beings no matter how successful you are. Refusing to be caught in the chains of conformity and complacency and sheer cowardliness. Martin Luther King Jr. used to say in so many of his speeches, I would rather be dead than afraid. And one of the ways in which the cowardly, the complacent, and conformists fall in line is that they're afraid, they're scared. And the only thing that breaks the back of fear is love. Last thing we need for the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer, and Rabbi Heschel, and Dorothy Day, and Cesar Chavez, is to have a whole generation of young people highly successful, well-adjusted to injustice, and well-adapted to indifference. I say this to young folk everywhere I go. So the last thing we need is a whole new wave of peacocks. Look at me, look at me, look at me, look how much money I have, look how much status I have, look how big my house is, look at my son. Please, don't confuse fruits that ought to flow from your work, from foliage. That's an extension of your peacock status. I can hear Martin Luther King Jr. saying from the grave, peacocks strut because they can't fly, strutting around. Poor people living extraneously through the highly successful ones. No, let's find out what their souls are made of. What are they willing to fight for? What are they willing to give up? What cost are they willing to pay? That's the question that Martin Luther King Jr. has for each and every one of us. And like the conclusion of a practical Aristotelian syllogism, it's not a proposition, it's a life lived. Young folk these days would rather see sermons than hear them. It's easy to speak some pretty words, but who's going to be in the funk and the mess? In love with truth, in love with goodness, in love with beauty. Who are the musicians that are willing to go to the edge of life's abyss? That's what I love about my dear brother, Kendrick Lamar Compton. It's not that he's the most talented, but that he's one of the most courageous in pushing himself Socratic, with tears flowing. Here in his music, the words of Emmett Till's mother. You all know who Emmett Till was, a young brother from Chicago, went down to Mississippi and was killed, dropped in the Tallahatchie River, and they brought his body back to Chicago. Mamie Till kept that casket open. Robert's Temple Church of God in Christ. When she stepped to the lectern with tears flowing, Socratic and questioning, prophetic and tear-driven witness, and they had cameras from all around the world. She said, I don't have a minute to hate. I will pursue justice for the rest of my life. That's a voice, strong voice, that's at work in the best of the artists, the best of the activists, the best of the professors, the lawyers, the pharmacists, and others. And we will end this magnificent gathering. I'm just so blessed to be here. You all so kind to let me talk. I want to end with the anthem of the tradition and the people that produced Martin Luther King Jr. What is that anthem? Lift every voice. It's not lift every echo. If you're an echo, you're still a copy. If you're a copy, you're still trying to conform. But when you find your voice, it's just like your fingerprint. It's yours and only yours, because there has never been and there will never be a person like you in the history of the species. And of course, for blues people, you can't be a blues woman like Ma Rainey without finding your voice. You can't be a jazz man like John Coltrane without finding your voice. You can't be a jazz artist like Erykah Badu without her finding her voice. But those are artists producing certain kind of sound. We have to be artists in our lives, trying to enact the art of living. Martin Luther King Jr., in that sense, was an artist of living with the Socratic legacy and the prophetic legacies shaping him, the backdrop of an enslaved people, a Jim Crow people, a hated people, and yet dishing out all of this love. And how long will the legacy of that love last? It depends on each and every one of us. Thank you all so very much.